So let's look at an example of how we construct the try, catch, and throw, like what's the difference declaring, throwing, and catching exceptions. So when we catch, we put try catch inside the statement in the method that we call, like for example, our code here for the quotient with exceptions. So this is the method main. We call another method quotients, and the quotients we have throw exceptions. So, but I didn't use try catch to handle. When I'm not using try catch to handle, when I run this code, put 1 divided by 0, it's not going to handle exceptions. It's only throw and put the word that we put devices cannot be 0 out. Throw the arithmetic exception, because we asked it to throw. Now, if we put the catch statements, so that means we start to handle if the user happen to put 1 and 0, we're going to print exceptions that the program cannot divide by 0. Right, the program still continue. You can pretty much just loop back and prompt the user to enter the number again. Right, instead of throwing. So let's run this. So 1, 0. So exception and user cannot be divided by 0. Like now I didn't put a loop in, so but showing that the program still continued. So continue to, because we handle it instead of throw it. So the one who handle is handle in the main when you use it. The one who throw is a quotient is throw. Like quotient should not handle, should let the main handle it. And let's put a comment back. Like you see that it's not required. This is called unchecked exceptions. Right? We talk about there are checked and unchecked exceptions. And normally runtime exception are unchecked exception. Errors are unchecked exceptions. Just like this method, quotient is unchecked exception. So now, if I put the declare exception here, I want to declare beside the method throws exception, and I have to throw exception in there, but I want to declare throw inside the method, right? At the method headers, I said throws arithmetic exception. Okay. You can also use exception, because exception, we talk about polymorphism. Arithmetic exception is in the form of exception. Correct? Because sometimes exception is better, because you don't know if the user is going to divide by 0 errors or input invalid mismatch errors. You don't know what type of exception it's going to be, so just throw the parents. It's going to handle all the exceptions. Now, if I add the keyword throw exceptions, let's see if I took it out. This is called unchecked exceptions, right? Quotient is not required you to check. But if I make those exceptions, whoever uses quotient is required to check exception. This is called check exceptions. Like, it's not handled. You have to handle it. Otherwise, the compiler will not allow you to use quotient. So to handle it, you pretty much have to surround by try and catch. And then the compiler will be happy, because we handle, and we have to handle by exception type that we specified earlier, right? Because we said throw exception, so you handle. So this is called check exceptions, right? Like we looking at it earlier, Most of these are unchecked. That's why when we do scanner keyboard next in, there's no problem because it's unchecked exception. You can use next in method without checking exceptions. Like what I shown you before, if quotient doesn't have throw exception, you can use quotient without checking. We call unchecked exceptions. But if we want to use quotient now, it has to be check exceptions, right? Like IO exception, when we want to read in from the file, you have to do try catch. Otherwise, compiler will not allow you to do that. We're gonna look at that in the following slides. So unchecked exception could be null pointer exception, index outbound exception. When you use array, when you do instantiate and instance of object, you normally don't have to check. But we understand that some of the exception we have to check. Now, if we wanted to check, we create our own by adding throw exception, declare exception at the method header. And then inside implementation, you just need to throw exception. So declaring exception, every method must state the types of check exception it might throw. This is known as declaring exception. Like you can say throw IO exception. You can do more than one, comma, other exceptions. So I can just say comma, input mismatch exception if I wanted to check. But when you check the exception, it's pretty much cover everything, right? You can do arithmetic exception. You can have more than one, right? In that case, we can surrounding with, like we do exception is handle because parents, right? All exception pass in, this is generates, right? Yeah, under this. Or you can do arithmetic exceptions if you want to do one by one like this. And you can do catch input mismatch exception. You can do that way too. You can have multiple catch. Right, and say check like input must be an integer. Right? We can do that too. Throwing exceptions. When the program detects an error, the program can create an instance of an appropriate exception type and throw it. So this is known as throwing an exception. So you can use throw new the exception like what I did here. Throw new when an exception, create an instance of that exceptions and throw it. Which is the same as you instantiate the object EX and throw EX. This is the same either way. So this is an example of when we want to call the set radius. We can throw, make a check exception. Whenever instead of the object you set radius has to handle illegal argument exception, and throw new illegal argument exceptions. And I just show you that you can have multiple catches for each exceptions. Catching exceptions. So we handle it. We start to catch, like, hey, method 1 said I have to handle exceptions. in method 1 itself, you don't really need to do throw if you want to handle inside. And in method 1 also invoke method 2, which has to handle exceptions in method 2. And method 3, and exception is thrown in method 3. So if it's thrown, then this method 2 has to handle that exceptions, and method 1 has to handle method 2 exceptions, and method has to handle method 1 exception. It's just like a stack that you push in, and then you just pop out to handle its exceptions. Catch or declare check exceptions. We talk about declare those at the method level. That's called declare check exceptions. Right, and we throw that. So we start to look at IO exception as an example. IO exception is one of the exceptions in the Java class library. When you try to read in the file, we can say if a file doesn't exist, then we throw an IO exception and put the word file doesn't exist. And that's how we define the method. So since this declare check exceptions, then when P1 this is handle, right? So this is when you declare. But if you handle, you can say like P2 throw IO exception. P1 try to use P2. You can handle at the P2 try catch. Or if you don't want P1 to handle, you can just throw again. Okay. Like if you do check exceptions, Java will force you to deal with it. But if you want to handle it, you can just throw again, right? If you don't want to invoke a try catch. If you throw again, then it's just like the one who uses P1 has to handle it again. So let's see example then. Like in this case, I did handle it, right? So even we say check here, right? Check. So let's put exception. So you see it's going to be unhappy. You have to do handle exceptions. So if I don't want to handle it, I can just throw again. Exception. Then it should be okay too. Like you don't have to handle it if you want to throw again. But it is not common for main. Main should handle all the exceptions. Otherwise, that's the reason to use exception. But it's common for the method, like chaining. When a method call another method, call another method. Sum up exception can be handled in this. If not, then let the caller handle it instead. So that's what it's trying to explain right here. You can throw instead of try catch. Now, if I don't want to throw, then of course just catch exception then. Right? Otherwise, compiler will not allow you to pass this. So we just say catch exception E. Now when you do E, now that's going to be a question again. That if you catch it like this, all other exception will never be reached. Because exception is the parent of all the exceptions. Then if you want to do, you should move it at the end. The parents should go at the end. Then there's no errors. Because there's no way that arithmetic exception input mismatch exception will be reached if you put exception before that, right? All right, so that's how we construct it. So the children of exception class should go